The horseback preacher rode into Douglas, Arizona on a Saturday afternoon in August of 1884, dust trailing behind his bay mare like smoke from a dying fire. And by Monday morning, he would be gone again. Except this time, a widow with questions in her eyes would change everything he thought he knew about staying and leaving. Reverend Lucas Parker had been riding circuit through the Arizona Territory for 3 years, bringing the word to settlements too small or too poor to support a permanent minister. He never stayed longer than necessary. Saturday arrival, Sunday service, Monday departure. It was a rhythm that had served him well, kept him from forming attachments, kept him from the painful business of watching people expect more from him than he could give. At 32, he had learned that permanence was an illusion, that everything worth loving eventually turned to dust in your hands. Douglas was a cattle town, sprawled along the border with Mexico, its main street lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more than they delivered. The saloon, the general store, the blacksmith, the hotel, all the usual landmarks of civilization trying to take root in harsh soil. Lucas guided his mare toward the modest church at the end of the street, a whitewashed structure with a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left, as if the building itself was uncertain about its purpose here. He dismounted and tied the mare to the hitching post, stretching the stiffness from his back. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air thick and heavy. A lizard skittered across the church steps and disappeared into a crack in the foundation. Lucas removed his black hat and wiped the sweat from his forehead, then retrieved his worn Bible from his saddlebag. The church door was unlocked. Inside, the air was marginally cooler, though the heat had a presence even here, settling into the wooden pews like an unwelcome congregation. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that came through the windows. Lucas walked to the front, his boots echoing on the plank floor, and set his Bible on the simple pulpit. "You must be the circuit preacher." Lucas turned. A woman stood in the doorway, backlit by the fierce afternoon sun. She stepped inside, and he could see her more clearly. She was perhaps 28 or 29, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a simple calico dress that had been mended more than once. Her face was striking rather than pretty, with strong bones and eyes the color of creek water in shadow, green-brown and impossible to read. "Lucas Parker," he said, offering a slight nod. "I will be holding service tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I know. I am Magdalena Ortiz." She moved closer, her hands folded in front of her. "I maintain the church, clean it, make sure the hymn books are in order, things like that." "I appreciate it, Miss Ortiz. The church is in fine condition." "Mrs. Ortiz," she corrected gently. "I am a widow. My apologies, Mrs. Ortiz." She waved away the apology with a small gesture. "My husband died 2 years ago, thrown from a horse during a storm. Thomas was a good man, a good husband. We had been married 5 years. Lucas nodded, unsure what to say. People told him things like this constantly, shared their losses and griefs as if his collar gave him special insight into suffering. The truth was, he had no more answers than anyone else. "I wanted to ask you something," Magdalena said. She hesitated, and Lucas saw something in her face, a vulnerability that made him want to step back to maintain the professional distance he had cultivated so carefully. "Of course," he said instead. "Not now. After the service tomorrow, if you have time before you leave." "I always have time for my congregants, Mrs. Ortiz." She studied him for a long moment, and Lucas had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen more clearly than he liked. Then she nodded. "Tomorrow, then. I should let you settle in. You will be staying at the boarding house, I assume." "Miss Henderson expects you." "Yes, thank you." Magdalena turned to leave, then paused at the door. "It is good you are here, Reverend. There are people in this town who need to hear they are not forgotten by God." She did not wait for his response, just stepped out into the brutal sunlight and was gone. Lucas stood alone in the church, listening to the silence. Not forgotten by God. He wondered if that was true, if any of them were remembered by a deity that seemed content to let the world grind on without intervention. He wondered, and then he pushed the thought away, picked up his Bible, and began to prepare for the next day's sermon. The boarding house was run by a stern-faced woman named Agatha Henderson, who showed him to a small room on the second floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the dusty street. Supper was served at 6, she informed him, and breakfast at 7. Church folk received a discount on the rate, which she clearly considered more than generous. Lucas washed the trail dust from his face and hands, changed into a clean shirt, and spent the remaining hour before supper reviewing his sermon notes. He had preached variations of the same message dozens of times, words about faith and perseverance, about trusting in God's plan even when that plan seemed incomprehensible. The words came easily now, smooth and practiced. Too smooth, perhaps, too practiced. Supper was a quiet affair, shared with 2 cattle buyers and a prospector who talked incessantly about a silver claim he was certain would make his fortune. Lucas ate his beans and cornbread, contributed little to the conversation, and excused himself as soon as politeness allowed. He returned to his room and lay on the narrow bed, watching the last light fade from the window. He thought about Magdalena Ortiz, about the question she wanted to ask. In his experience, people usually wanted one of 3 things from a preacher: absolution for something they had done, explanation for something that had happened to them, or permission to stop fighting and give up. He wondered which category her question would fall into. Sleep came slowly, accompanied by the distant sound of piano music from the saloon, and the occasional shout of cowboys letting off steam. Lucas had learned to sleep through almost anything during his years on the circuit. But tonight he found himself restless, turning on the uncomfortable mattress, unable to find a position that felt right. Sunday morning arrived with merciless sunshine and heat that promised to intensify as the day progressed. Lucas dressed carefully in his black suit and white collar, the uniform of his calling. He skipped breakfast, preferring to take communion on an empty stomach, and walked to the church just after 9 o'clock. People were already gathering. Ranchers and their families, townspeople in their Sunday best, even a few cowboys who looked uncomfortable in clean shirts. Lucas greeted them at the door, shaking hands, learning names he would forget by Tuesday. An older couple, the Harrisons, who owned a spread to the north. A young family, the Mitchells, with 3 children who squirmed and whispered. A Mexican family, the Rodriguezes, who nodded respectfully but kept slightly apart from the others. Magdalena arrived just before 10, wearing a dark blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She carried a basket covered with a cloth, which she set on a table at the back of the church. Lucas caught her eye and she gave him a small smile, then took a seat in the 3rd pew. The service followed the familiar pattern. Opening hymn, scripture reading, sermon, closing hymn, benediction. Lucas preached about the woman at the well, about living water and second chances. His voice filled the small church, and the congregation listened with the hungry attention of people starved for spiritual sustenance. When he invited them to sing Amazing Grace, their voices rose together, rough and untrained but earnest. After the benediction, people lingered. They wanted to talk, to have Lucas pray over sick relatives or bless new ventures. He did what was expected, gave what he could, all the while aware of Magdalena waiting patiently near the back of the church. Finally, the last congregants departed, and it was just the two of them in the quiet building. Magdalena uncovered her basket, revealing fresh rolls and a jar of jam. "I thought you might not have eaten," she said. "The Sunday sermon is long work." "Thank you, Mrs. Ortiz." "That is very thoughtful. Please call me Magdalena, and may I call you Lucas? All the formality seems unnecessary." He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." They sat in a pew and shared the rolls. The jam was strawberry, sweet and bright. Lucas realized he was hungry, realized he had been running on nervous energy all morning. "You preach well," Magdalena said. "You make people believe the words matter." "Do they not matter to you?" She considered the question, breaking off a piece of her roll. "They matter. But sometimes I wonder if believing is enough. Sometimes I wonder if we are supposed to do more than just have faith." "Faith requires action," Lucas said automatically. "James tells us faith without works is dead." "Yes, but what works? What action?" She turned to face him directly. "That is what I wanted to ask you, Lucas. That is the question I cannot answer on my own." He waited, sensing this was important, that whatever came next would be the real reason she had asked him to stay. "My husband left me a small ranch," Magdalena said. 50 acres, a dozen cattle, a house that needs constant repair. I have been managing it alone for 2 years with help from a ranch hand named Samuel when I can afford to pay him. It is hard work, but I have managed. She paused, her hands folding the cloth from the basket into precise creases. "But there is a problem. A man named Cyrus Kincaid owns the property adjacent to mine. He wants my land, wants to expand his holdings. He has made me offers, increasingly generous offers, but I do not want to sell. That land is all I have left of Thomas, of the life we built together." "He cannot force you to sell," Lucas said. "No, but he can make my life difficult. His cattle break through our shared fence line and eat my grass. His men ride too close to my property, sometimes at night making noise, frightening my animals. Nothing I can prove, nothing I can take to the sheriff. Just pressure, constant pressure, wearing me down." Lucas felt a familiar anger stirring, the kind that had driven him to become a preacher in the first place, the desire to stand between the powerful and the powerless. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to talk to him. I want you to appeal to his better nature if he has one. I want you to make him understand that I have a right to keep my land." She met his eyes, and he saw determination there, but also fear. "I know it is asking a lot. I know you leave tomorrow. But I have prayed about this, Lucas, and when I heard you were coming, I felt that maybe God was providing an answer." This was the moment to say no. To explain that he did not involve himself in local disputes, that his calling was spiritual, not temporal, that he had to leave tomorrow because there was another town waiting, another service to conduct. All good reasons, all true reasons. "Where can I find Mr. Kincaid?" Lucas asked instead. Relief washed across Magdalena's face. "His ranch is 5 miles east of town, the Circle K, everyone knows it. I will ride out this afternoon. Thank you." Her voice was soft but fervent. "Thank you, Lucas." He helped her pack up the basket, and they walked together out of the church into the blazing midday heat. Magdalena untied her horse, a sturdy sorrel mare, from the hitching post and swung into the saddle with practiced ease. "Be careful," she said, looking down at him. "Kincaid is not a violent man, but he is used to getting what he wants. He will not appreciate interference." "I am just a preacher," Lucas said. "What harm can I do?" She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her face. "I think you can do more than you pretend, Lucas Parker." Then she rode away, and Lucas was left standing in the sun, wondering what he had just committed himself to and why he felt more alive than he had in months. He returned to the boarding house, changed out of his formal clothes into trail gear, and saddled his mare. The ride to the Circle K took him through open-range country, grass gone brown under the relentless sun, occasional mesquite trees offering meager shade. Cattle bore Kincaid's brand, a C and K intertwined. Lucas passed a line shack where two cowboys watched him with flat, incurious eyes. The ranch house was impressive, a two-story structure with a wide porch and real glass windows. Outbuildings surrounded it, bunkhouse, barn, smokehouse, corrals. This was a successful operation, built on the kind of scale that could crush a small rancher without much effort. Lucas tied his mare at the porch and knocked on the front door. A Mexican woman answered, her face carefully neutral. "I am Reverend Parker. I would like to speak with Mr. Kincaid. Wait here." She closed the door, leaving Lucas on the porch. He waited, listening to the sounds of the ranch. Horses moving in the corrals, men calling to each other, the rhythmic clang of a hammer on metal from the smithy. The door opened again. The woman stepped aside, and Lucas entered a parlor furnished with heavy dark furniture and rugs that looked expensive. Cyrus Kincaid stood by the fireplace, a man in his late 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of presence that came from years of being obeyed. Reverend Parker. An unexpected visit. I assume this is not a social call. No, sir. I am here to discuss Mrs. Ortiz. Kincaid's expression did not change. The widow, what about her? She tells me you have been pressuring her to sell her property. Pressuring is a strong word. I have made her fair offers. Very fair offers. She refuses to be reasonable. Perhaps she has her reasons for wanting to keep her land. Kincaid moved to a sideboard and poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. He did not offer one to Lucas. "Reverend, I respect your calling, but you do not understand business. That woman is sitting on land she cannot properly manage. Her herd is small, her fences are falling down, she is barely scraping by. I could put that land to good use, pay her more than it is worth, allow her to move into town and live comfortably. Everyone would benefit. Everyone except Magdalena, who would lose her home and her livelihood." Sentiment. Kincaid dismissed the word with a wave. "Sentiment does not pay bills, Reverend. I am being kind, making offers. Others might simply wait for her to fail and buy the land from the bank. And your cattle breaking through her fences. Your men riding past her house at night. Is that kindness as well?" Kincaid's eyes hardened. "Cattle sometimes wander. Men ride where they need to ride. If Mrs. Ortiz has complaints, she should take them to the sheriff. We both know the sheriff answers to the big ranchers in this territory. Then perhaps Mrs. Ortiz should accept reality. This is a hard country, Reverend. It does not favor the weak." Lucas felt his temper rising but kept his voice level. "I am asking you, as a man of faith, to leave Magdalena Ortiz alone. Let her keep her land in peace. Surely your holdings are substantial enough without adding her 50 acres. "My faith is my own business," Kincaid said coldly. "And so are my business dealings. I appreciate your concern, Reverend, but this matter does not involve you. You will be gone tomorrow, back to riding your circuit, and things here will continue as they have been." "What if I do not leave tomorrow?" The words surprised Lucas almost as much as they surprised Kincaid. The older man studied him over his glass. "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning I will stay in Douglas as long as necessary to ensure that Magdalena Ortiz is treated fairly." Kincaid laughed, a short bark of sound. "You would give up your circuit for a widow you barely know." "That is either remarkably noble or remarkably foolish." "Perhaps both," Lucas admitted, "but I am doing it nonetheless." "Then you are wasting your time and mine." Kincaid set down his glass with a sharp click. "Good day, Reverend. I trust you can find your own way out." Lucas left the ranch house feeling both righteous and slightly sick. He had just upended his entire life for a woman he had met yesterday, for a situation he did not fully understand. It was impulsive, irrational, completely unlike his usual careful approach to everything. It also felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. He rode back to Douglas slowly, thinking through the implications of his decision. He would need to send word to the other settlements on his circuit, arrange for another preacher to cover his route, or simply leave those towns without services. He would need to find a way to support himself in Douglas, because he could not expect the small congregation to pay a full-time minister's salary. He would need to figure out what he was actually doing and why. Magdalena was waiting on the steps of the church when he arrived. She stood as he dismounted, her expression anxious. "How did it go?" "Not well. Kincaid has no intention of leaving you alone." Her face fell. "Then I am back where I started." "Not quite. I told him I was staying in Douglas." She stared at him. "Staying? But your circuit, your other congregations, they will manage, or they will not. Right now you need help more than they need another sermon." Magdalena shook her head slowly. "Lucas, I cannot ask you to do that. Giving up your calling for my problems, it is too much." "You did not ask." "I offered. There is a difference." "But why? You do not even know me." It was a fair question, one Lucas did not have a good answer for. He had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, exactly this kind of personal investment in other people's lives. But something about Magdalena, about her quiet strength and her determination to hold on to what was hers, had gotten past his defenses. "I know you are being treated unjustly," he said finally. "I know you need help. That is enough." She studied him for a long moment, and Lucas had the sense of being evaluated, of being weighed in some internal balance. Then she nodded. "All right. If you are staying, then you should see the ranch, see what you are involving yourself in. Now. The evening chores need doing anyway, and you can help." It was not a request, and Lucas found himself smiling despite everything. "Yes, madam." They rode out together, following a wagon track that led northwest from town. Magdalena rode well, moving with her horse rather than fighting it, and Lucas found himself watching her more than the trail. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The Ortiz ranch was modest, exactly as she had described it. A small house built of adobe and wood, weathered but solid. A barn that had seen better days. Corrals made from whatever materials had been available, pieced together and repaired more times than Lucas could count. A windmill creaked in the breeze, pumping water into a metal tank. "It is not much," Magdalena said, dismounting, "but it is mine." "It is honest work," Lucas said. "Nothing shameful in that." They stabled the horses and Magdalena showed him around. The cattle were scattered across the property, 15 head now, she explained. 2 had gone missing last month, probably strayed through a broken fence into Kincaid's range and been absorbed into his herd. The ranch hand, Samuel, came by 3 days a week to help with the heavy work, but Magdalena did most of it herself. Lucas helped her feed the chickens, check the fences near the house, and haul water. It was simple work but satisfying in a way preaching had stopped being. His hands knew what to do, his body settling into the rhythm of physical labor. He had grown up on a farm in Kansas, and the skills came back easily. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Magdalena invited him inside for supper. The house was small but comfortable, decorated with the kind of care that spoke of limited resources stretched to their best effect. A handmade quilt on the back of a chair, wildflowers in a chipped vase, a photograph on the mantel showing Magdalena and a young man with a proud, open face. "Thomas?" Lucas asked, gesturing to the photograph. "Yes, that was taken on our wedding day." She looked at the image, her expression soft. He was 23 when we married. I was 22. We had such plans, Lucas. We were going to build this ranch into something substantial, raise children, grow old together. All the ordinary dreams people have. I am sorry for your loss. Are you? She turned to face him. Or are you just saying what preachers say? The directness of the question caught him off guard. I do not know any more, he admitted. I have said those words so many times they have stopped meaning anything. But yes, Magdalena, I am sorry. No one should lose their partner so young. She nodded, accepting the honesty. Help me with supper. They worked together in the small kitchen, Magdalena directing and Lucas following her lead. She made tortillas while he cut vegetables, and soon the smell of cooking filled the house. They ate at a simple wooden table, and Magdalena asked him about his life, about how he had become a circuit preacher. Lucas found himself telling her things he had not told anyone in years, about his childhood on the farm in Kansas, about his younger sister, Sarah, who had died of pneumonia when she was 10 and he was 15, about how her death had sent him searching for meaning, searching for some explanation that made sense of a world where children died and parents wept and God seemed distant as the stars. I thought becoming a preacher would give me answers, he said. I thought I would find some peace in serving God and helping others, but mostly I just found more questions. And yet you kept doing it. What else was there? I had no land, no trade, no other calling. The church was all I had. Is that why you never stayed in one place? Because you were still searching? Lucas paused, a forkful of food halfway to his mouth. Maybe. I told myself I was needed on the circuit, that small settlements could not afford a permanent minister. But perhaps I was just afraid of staying, afraid of forming attachments that would hurt when they ended. Everything ends, Lucas. That is not a reason to avoid living. No, he agreed, but it is an excuse, and excuses are easier than courage. After supper, Lucas insisted on helping with the dishes. They worked in comfortable silence, and Lucas found himself acutely aware of Magdalena's presence beside him, the brush of her arm against his, the sound of her breathing in the quiet house. It had been a long time since he had felt this kind of simple domestic intimacy with anyone. You should stay here tonight, Magdalena said as they finished. It is a long ride back to town in the dark, and the boarding house will charge you whether you sleep there or not. I do not want to impose or compromise your reputation. She laughed, a warm sound. Lucas, I am a widow running a ranch alone. My reputation is already unconventional. Besides, you are a preacher. People will assume propriety even if they gossip. He wanted to argue but could not find a good reason to. All right, thank you. She showed him to a small room off the kitchen, barely large enough for a bed and a chair. This was going to be a nursery, she said quietly. We never got the chance. Lucas heard the grief in her voice, the weight of lost futures. I am sorry, he said again, and this time she just nodded. He lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the sounds of the house settling and the distant howl of coyotes. He thought about the decision he had made, about staying in Douglas, about Magdalena and her quiet strength. He thought about the life he had been living, always moving, never settling, and wondered if maybe it was time to stop running from attachments and start running toward them instead. Morning came with the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee. Lucas dressed and found Magdalena already in the kitchen, making breakfast. She handed him a cup of coffee without a word, and he took it gratefully. Samuel will be here soon, she said. There is fence that needs repairing on the southern boundary. Would you be willing to help? That is why I am here. They worked all morning under the hot sun, digging post holes and stretching wire. Samuel turned out to be a weather-beaten man in his 60s, half Mexican and half Apache, with hands like tree roots and a face that revealed nothing. He spoke little but worked with the kind of efficiency that came from a lifetime of ranch labor. Lucas watched how Samuel interacted with Magdalena, the easy respect between them, the way they communicated with glances and small gestures. This was a partnership built on mutual trust, and Lucas felt like an intruder, awkward and out of place. But as the morning progressed, he found his rhythm. The work was hard but satisfying, and by the time they broke for lunch, Lucas felt like he had contributed something real. "You know how to work," Samuel said as they ate in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "That is good. Magdalena needs help that knows what it is doing. I grew up on a farm." Samuel nodded as if that explained everything. "You staying around then, not just passing through?" "I am staying." "Good." Samuel stood, stretching his back. "This ranch, it is good land, good woman, should not be left alone." They finished the fence work by mid-afternoon. Samuel departed with a taciturn farewell, and Lucas helped Magdalena with the remaining chores. As they worked, he found himself telling her stories from his circuit riding, about the people he had met and the places he had been. She listened with genuine interest, laughing at the funny moments and falling quiet at the sad ones. "You have seen a lot of the territory," she said as they checked on the cattle. "Yes, but I have not really known any of it. Always passing through, never staying long enough to understand a place or its people." "And now you are staying. How does it feel?" Lucas considered the question. "Strange, frightening, right?" She smiled at that. "Right is good, right is worth the fear." Over the next week, Lucas settled into a new routine. He helped Magdalena with the ranch work during the day and stayed at the boarding house at night, a compromise that satisfied propriety while keeping him close enough to be useful. The congregation in Douglas was surprised but pleased to have a full-time minister, and Lucas began making pastoral visits, getting to know the people he was now serving. But most of his time and attention went to the ranch and to Magdalena. They worked together dawn to dusk, their partnership becoming more natural with each passing day. Lucas learned the rhythms of ranch life, the constant cycle of feeding and watering and repairing. He learned which fence lines needed the most attention, which cattle were prone to wandering, how to read the weather in the morning sky. He also learned about Magdalena. She was fiercely independent but not stubborn, willing to accept help but not charity. She had been born in Douglas, the daughter of a Mexican father and an Anglo mother, navigating between two cultures her whole life. Her faith was quiet but deep, expressed more in actions than words. She loved this land with a passion that Lucas was only beginning to understand. And somewhere in that first week, Lucas realized he was falling in love with her. It was not sudden or dramatic. It crept up on him in small moments. The way she laughed when a calf kicked over the milk bucket. The competent movement of her hands as she mended a harness. The quiet strength in her voice when she talked about Thomas and the life they had built. The way she looked at him sometimes, as if she saw past the preacher's collar to the man underneath. He did not say anything. It was too soon, too complicated. She was still grieving her husband, and he was supposed to be here to help with her ranch problems, not to pursue his own desires. But the feeling was there, growing stronger each day, undeniable as the sunrise. Kincaid did not make another move immediately, but his presence loomed over everything. Lucas saw his ranch hands in town, watched them watch Magdalena with flat, assessing eyes. Twice more, cattle broke through the southern fence line, and both times Lucas and Samuel spent hours riding Kincaid's range to retrieve them. "He is testing you," Samuel said on one of these expeditions. "Seeing if you will give up, go back to your circuit riding." "I am not going anywhere." "Good, but be careful, Reverend. Kincaid, he is a patient man, he will wait for his moment." The warning proved prophetic. 3 weeks after Lucas had first arrived in Douglas, Magdalena discovered that someone had poisoned her well. The water was foul, undrinkable, laced with something that made the cattle sick and killed 2 chickens outright. Lucas was in town when he heard the news. He rode immediately to the ranch, finding Magdalena standing by the well with Samuel, her face pale with fury and fear. "Kincaid," she said when she saw Lucas. "This has his signature all over it. Enough pressure to make my life impossible, but nothing I can prove to the law." "We can dig a new well," Lucas said. "With what money? Do you know how expensive that is? And in the meantime, I have to haul water from town or ask my neighbors for help, which makes me look weak and incompetent." Lucas understood the trap. Kincaid was systematically removing Magdalena's ability to operate independently, forcing her to either accept help that came with obligations or give up entirely. "Then we fight back," he said. "How? What can we do that would not make things worse?" Lucas thought about it, turning the problem over in his mind. "We make him look bad. We expose what he is doing in a way that turns public opinion against him. This is cattle country, Lucas. Kincaid is a successful rancher. People admire success. They will not turn on him for squeezing out a widow, no matter how sympathetic they might feel. Not unless we give them a reason to." An idea was forming, risky but possible. What if we held a barn raising? Invite the whole community to help repair your ranch to show solidarity. Make it a social event, a celebration. Put Kincaid in the position of either backing off or openly opposing community support for a widow. Either way, he loses. Magdalena looked at Samuel, who shrugged. "Might work. People like an excuse to gather to feel like they are doing something good." "It is worth trying," Magdalena said slowly. "But Lucas, organizing something like that takes time and effort. Are you certain you want to commit to this?" "I am already committed. I committed the moment I decided to stay." She held his gaze, and Lucas saw something shift in her expression, a softening, an acknowledgement of what was growing between them. She did not say anything, but she did not need to. The understanding passed between them without words. They spent the next week spreading the word about the barn raising, framing it as a community service project. Lucas used his position as minister to encourage participation, emphasizing the Christian duty to help neighbors in need. Magdalena visited every ranch and homestead within riding distance, extending personal invitations. The response was better than Lucas had dared hope. People were tired of Kincaid's dominance, tired of seeing small ranchers squeezed out. A barn raising gave them a way to express that frustration without directly challenging the man's power. The day of the event dawned clear and hot. People began arriving at mid-morning, families in wagons loaded with tools and food. The older men organized work crews to repair the barn and outbuildings. Women set up tables for the communal meal. Children ran wild, delighted to have other kids to play with. Lucas worked alongside everyone else, hammering nails and sawing boards. He watched Magdalena move through the crowd, thanking people, laughing at jokes, her whole face lit with something like joy. This was what community meant, he thought. Not just sharing space, but sharing labor, sharing resources, sharing the burden of survival. Kincaid did not show up, but Lucas spotted 2 of his ranch hands watching from a distant hillside. Let them watch, he thought. Let them report back that Magdalena Ortiz had allies, that she was not alone and vulnerable. By late afternoon, the barn had been substantially repaired, fences mended, firewood chopped and stacked. The mood was celebratory, people proud of what they had accomplished together. Magdalena stood on the porch and thanked everyone, her voice carrying across the yard. "You have given me more than labor today," she said. "You have given me hope. You have reminded me that I am part of something larger than myself, part of a community that cares for its own. I will not forget this. Thank you." There was applause and cheering. Someone produced a fiddle and impromptu music started. People danced in the yard as the sun set, and Lucas found himself swept up in the celebration. Magdalena appeared at his elbow. "Dance with me." "I am not much of a dancer." "Neither am I, but I would like to anyway." He took her hand and they joined the others. They moved awkwardly at first, finding their rhythm, and then something clicked. They were just two people dancing in the dust, but it felt like more. It felt like a promise, a statement, a declaration that they were choosing each other despite all the complications. "Thank you," Magdalena said quietly, "for all of this. For staying, for helping, for caring. You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You gave up your whole life for me, Lucas." "That is not something I take lightly." "I did not give it up. I traded it for something better." She looked up at him, and Lucas saw tears in her eyes. "I am afraid," she whispered, "afraid of what I am starting to feel for you. Afraid it is too soon, afraid it is disloyal to Thomas, afraid of losing someone else I love." "Love," the word caught in his throat. "Yes, love. I think I am falling in love with you, Lucas Parker, and it terrifies me." He stopped dancing, there in the middle of the crowd, and looked at her properly. "I love you too," he said. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is too soon and too complicated, but I do. I love you, Magdalena." She smiled through her tears. "Then what do we do about it?" "I do not know, but we will figure it out together." They resumed dancing, and Lucas felt a lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the music. Around them, the celebration continued, people laughing and talking and enjoying the evening. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Lucas felt like he belonged somewhere, like he was home. The barn raising did exactly what Lucas had hoped. It shifted the community's perception, making Magdalena's struggle visible and sympathetic. For several weeks, Kincaid made no further moves, apparently reassessing his strategy. Lucas and Magdalena used the time to strengthen the ranch, to repair what had been neglected, to build reserves against future challenges. They also grew closer, the boundaries between friendship and romance becoming increasingly blurred. They did not rush into anything. Magdalena was still navigating her grief, still figuring out what it meant to love someone new while honoring the memory of her husband. Lucas was patient, content to let their relationship develop at its own pace. But there were moments when their hands touched while working and neither pulled away. Moments when they sat on the porch in the evening and talked until the stars came out. Moments when Lucas caught Magdalena looking at him with an expression that made his heart race. One evening, about 6 weeks after the barn raising, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Magdalena had been quiet all day, and Lucas could sense something weighing on her. "Tell me about Sarah," she said finally. Lucas was surprised. He had mentioned his sister once briefly but had not gone into detail. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What she was like, what happened, how you survived losing her." So Lucas told her. About Sarah's bright laughter and endless questions. About how she used to follow him everywhere, eager to help with farm chores even when she was more hindrance than help. About the winter she got sick, how they had watched her fade despite the doctor's efforts, despite prayer, despite their desperate love. "I was so angry," he said. "Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at myself for not being able to save her. I think that anger drove me into the ministry. I wanted to understand why, wanted to find some meaning in her death." "Did you find it?" "No. I found acceptance eventually, found a way to live with the loss. But meaning? I do not think loss has meaning, Magdalena. I think it is just something that happens and we survive or we do not." She reached over and took his hand. "I think you are right. After Thomas died, so many people told me it was God's plan, that there was a reason, but I could not see any reason that made his death acceptable. He was thrown from a horse, that is all. A moment of bad luck, a frightened animal, and my husband was gone. No meaning, no purpose, just loss. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, sharing the weight of their grief. "But I am ready to live again," Magdalena said. "Ready to love again. Thomas would want that for me. He was not a jealous man, and he loved life too much to want me to stop living because he was gone." Lucas turned to face her. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I love you, Lucas Parker. I am saying I want to build a life with you if you want the same thing." "I do. God, Magdalena, I do. But I need you to be certain. I need you to be sure this is what you want and not just a reaction to loneliness or fear." "I am sure. I have been sure for weeks. I was just waiting for myself to admit it." Lucas leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them feeling their way. Then Magdalena responded, her hand coming up to cup his face, and the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, Lucas was breathing hard. "We should do this properly," he said. "Court properly, get married properly. I know you are a widow and the rules are different, but I want to do right by you." Magdalena laughed. "Lucas, I am 29 years old and I run a ranch. I think I can make my own decisions about propriety. But yes, let us do this properly. Let us take our time and do it right." They courted through the fall of 1884 and into the winter. Lucas continued to serve as Douglas's minister while spending most of his free time at the ranch. The congregation was delighted by the developing romance, and Lucas endured good-natured teasing with as much grace as he could muster. Kincaid remained a shadow on the horizon, but for those few months it felt like maybe the danger had passed. Maybe the community support had been enough to dissuade him. Maybe they could actually build a life without constant threat. They were wrong. In January of 1885, Kincaid made his move. The land office in Tucson received a claim that the original deed to the Ortiz ranch was fraudulent, that the property actually belonged to Kincaid as part of a larger parcel acquired years before. It was a legal attack, clever and potentially devastating. Magdalena received notice that she would need to appear in Tucson with documentation proving her ownership. The hearing was set for early February. "This is insane," she said, staring at the notice. "My deed is legitimate. Thomas bought this land fair and square." "Where is the deed?" Lucas asked. "In the strong box in the bedroom. I can get it." She returned with a worn leather folder containing the original deed, signed and witnessed, dated 1878. Lucas examined it carefully. It looked legitimate to his untrained eye, but he was not a lawyer. "We need legal counsel," he said. "Someone who can represent you at the hearing and prove Kincaid's claim is false." "With what money?" "Lawyers are expensive, Lucas, and I have already spent most of my savings keeping the ranch running." "Then we will find the money. I have some saved and the congregation will help." "We are not letting Kincaid steal your land through legal trickery." Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas organized fundraising efforts. The community responded again, people giving what they could afford and sometimes more than they could afford. It was humbling and heartening, this outpouring of support for one of their own. They hired a lawyer from Tucson, a sharp-eyed man named Theodore Walsh, who listened to their story and examined the deed with professional attention. "Kincaid's claim is weak," Walsh said after reviewing everything, "but not frivolous. He has manufactured just enough documentation to make this look legitimate, which means we will have to prove his papers are forged or fraudulently obtained. That will take investigation, depositions, possibly weeks of work." "Whatever it takes," Magdalena said. "I am not losing my land." Lucas and Magdalena traveled to Tucson in early February, making the long journey by stagecoach. They stayed in a modest hotel near the courthouse, and Lucas found himself nervous in a way he had not been nervous in years. This was not something he could fix with a sermon or hard work. This required legal expertise and luck, neither of which were guaranteed. The hearing was held in a wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of tobacco and old paper. Kincaid was there with his own lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit. The land office representative presided, a bureaucrat more interested in procedure than justice. Walsh presented Magdalena's deed and the supporting documentation, tax records, survey maps, witness statements from neighbors. It was a solid case, built on legitimate paperwork. Kincaid's lawyer countered with an older deed, claiming it superseded Magdalena's, and that the land had been improperly subdivided and sold without Kincaid's knowledge. He produced survey maps that conflicted with the official records, suggested that witnesses had been mistaken or bribed. It was all lies, but they were plausible lies, wrapped in enough legal language to sound convincing. The hearing lasted 2 days. Walsh was brilliant, methodically dismantling Kincaid's claims, exposing inconsistencies in the documentation. But Kincaid's lawyer was good too, sowing doubt, suggesting alternative explanations, playing on bureaucratic reluctance to overturn established property claims. In the end, the land office representative reserved judgment, saying he would review the evidence and issue a decision within 30 days. Lucas and Magdalena returned to Douglas exhausted and uncertain. The waiting was agonizing, each day bringing them closer to a decision that would determine Magdalena's future. They spent those weeks trying to maintain normalcy, working the ranch, attending church, living their lives. But the shadow of the hearing hung over everything. Lucas proposed on a cold February evening, the two of them sitting by the fire in Magdalena's small house. "I do not know what the land office will decide," he said. "I do not know if we will still have this ranch next month or if we will have to start over somewhere else. But I know I want to start over with you. Marry me, Magdalena. Whatever happens, let us face it together." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then she turned to him, and there were tears on her cheeks. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in the Douglas church on a Sunday in March, 2 days after the land office ruling arrived. The ruling was in their favor. Walsh's careful demolition of Kincaid's case had been convincing enough to overcome bureaucratic inertia. The land was confirmed as Magdalena's property, the deed legitimate and binding. Kincaid was furious but defeated, at least legally. There was nothing more he could do through official channels. The community celebrated the victory as much as the wedding, the two events merging into one joyful affirmation of justice and love. Magdalena wore a simple cream-colored dress, and Lucas stood beside her in his black suit, and they spoke their vows in front of everyone who mattered. Samuel was there, a rare smile on his weathered face. The Harrisons and the Mitchells and the Rodriguezes, Miss Henderson from the boarding house. Half the town, it seemed, crammed into the small church. Lucas looked at Magdalena as she promised to love and honor him, and he felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness and completion he had been searching for his whole life. This was what he had been running from all those years on the circuit. Not commitment itself, but the vulnerability that came with it, the risk of losing someone he loved. But Magdalena was worth the risk. She was worth everything. They honeymooned at the ranch, which struck them both as appropriate. This land had brought them together, and it seemed right to begin their marriage here. They spent the days working side by side and the nights learning each other, discovering the rhythms of married life. Lucas was happy in a way he had forgotten was possible. He continued his duties as minister, but his real life was at the ranch with Magdalena. They were partners in every sense, sharing the work and the decisions and the dreams for the future. Kincaid made one final attempt in early summer. A group of men, probably his ranch hands though no one could prove it, tried to start a fire in Magdalena's barn late one night. Lucas and Magdalena were awake, Lucas restless with worry about a cow that was due to calve, and they saw the flicker of flames. They ran out together, Lucas grabbing a rifle on the way. The men fled when they saw they had been spotted, but not before Lucas got a clear look at their faces. He recognized two of them as Kincaid's employees. The next morning, Lucas rode to the Circle K. He did not go to the house. He rode into the center of the compound where men were working, and he dismounted in full view of everyone. "Cyrus Kincaid," he called out. Kincaid emerged from the barn, irritation on his face. "What do you want, Reverend? Last night, some of your men tried to burn down my wife's barn." "Our barn, I recognize them. Everyone here probably knows who they are." Kincaid's face went carefully blank. "I know nothing about that. If some men acted on their own, that is their business, not mine." "It is your business when you set the tone, when you make it clear that Magdalena Ortiz is your enemy. It is your business when your hatred drives people to commit crimes. Be careful, Reverend. Slander is a serious charge." Lucas stepped closer, his voice dropping but still carrying across the yard. "I am not accusing you of anything you have not done, but hear me clearly, Kincaid. If anything else happens to our ranch, if one more fence is cut or one more animal goes missing or one more fire is set, I will assume you are responsible. And I will not go to the sheriff, because we both know where his loyalties lie. I will go to every newspaper in the territory. I will write letters to the territorial governor. I will make you famous, Kincaid, but not in the way you want. I will make you the example of everything wrong with land barons and cattle kings who crush small ranchers. Do you understand me?" Kincaid's jaw tightened. "Are you threatening me, Reverend? I am promising you. Leave us alone. Leave my wife alone, or I will dedicate the rest of my life to making yours miserable." He remounted and rode away without waiting for a response. He was shaking, adrenaline and anger and fear mixing in his blood. He had just made a powerful enemy, had publicly challenged a man who was accustomed to getting his way. But he did not regret it. When he got back to the ranch, Magdalena was waiting. She had heard about his confrontation, word traveling fast in a small community. "You should not have done that," she said, but there was pride in her voice. "Yes, I should have. He needed to know he cannot keep attacking us without consequences. And if he calls your bluff, if he does something terrible, then I will follow through. I meant every word, Magdalena." She hugged him then, fiercely, and Lucas held her close, grateful for her strength and her courage. Kincaid did not make another move. Whatever Lucas's threat had accomplished, it seemed to be enough to make the man reconsider his campaign. Or perhaps he simply decided that the cost of continuing was higher than the benefit of acquiring 50 more acres. Either way, the attack stopped. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Lucas and Magdalena worked the ranch, building it slowly into a more substantial operation. With Samuel's help and occasional hired labor, they increased their herd to 30 head, repaired the house and barn, dug a new well. It was hard work, but it was their work, and they took satisfaction in every improvement. Lucas continued to preach on Sundays, but his sermons had changed. They were less about abstract theology and more about practical faith, about community and justice, and the ways people could support each other. His congregation grew, not just in Douglas but from surrounding ranches, people riding in for Sunday service because they liked what Lucas had to say and how he said it. In the fall of 1885, Magdalena told Lucas she was pregnant. He was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. They talked late into the night about their hopes and fears, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the child they would raise together. "I want to name him Thomas if it is a boy," Magdalena said. "To honor my first husband. Is that all right with you?" Lucas thought about it, about jealousy and security, and what it meant to share Magdalena's heart with the memory of another man. "Yes," he said finally. "Thomas was part of your life, part of who you are. I would be honored to have a son named after him. And if it is a girl, I want to name her Sarah, after your sister." Tears sprang to Lucas's eyes. "Are you certain?" "Yes. We carry our losses with us, Lucas. We should carry our love for them too." The baby came in May of 1886, a boy with dark hair and strong lungs. They named him Thomas Samuel, honoring both Magdalena's husband and the ranch hand who had been such a steady presence in their lives. Samuel himself seemed moved by the gesture, his weathered face softening when he held the baby for the first time. Lucas discovered that fatherhood transformed him in unexpected ways. He had thought he understood love, thought his feelings for Magdalena had taught him its depths. But holding his son, looking into that tiny face and knowing this person was his responsibility, his to protect and nurture and guide, opened something new in his heart. He was also terrified. Every time Thomas cried, Lucas worried something was wrong. Every cough or sneeze sent him into a panic. Magdalena bore his anxiety with patience, reminding him that babies were resilient, that worry was natural but should not paralyze them. "Your sister died of pneumonia, not of being loved," she told him gently. "You cannot protect Thomas from everything. All you can do is love him and teach him and trust that he will be strong." Lucas knew she was right, but it took time for his heart to accept what his head understood. Gradually, the fear ebbed, replaced by wonder and joy. Thomas was a happy baby, quick to smile, curious about everything. Lucas spent hours playing with him, talking to him, introducing him to the horses and cattle and chickens that made up their world. Life was good, better than good. Lucas had a wife he loved, a son he adored, work that mattered, a community that valued him. The wild restlessness that had driven him to circuit riding was gone, replaced by a deep contentment. 2 years later, Magdalena gave birth to their daughter. They named her Sarah Margaret, and she had Lucas's eyes and Magdalena's determination. Where Thomas was easygoing, Sarah was fierce, demanding attention and refusing to be ignored. Lucas loved her instantly and completely, this tiny person who seemed to contain her namesake's spirit. He would hold her and tell her stories about the aunt she would never meet, about a girl who loved life and laughter and asking endless questions. The ranch continued to prosper. With 2 young children, the work was harder, but also more meaningful. They were building something that would last, something their children could inherit and pass on to their own children someday. Kincaid aged and softened, or perhaps just accepted that some battles were not worth fighting. He occasionally nodded to Lucas in town, a grudging acknowledgement if not quite respect. When he died in 1890, his children divided up the Circle K, and the threat he had represented dissolved with him. Samuel worked for them until he was too old to ride, then moved into a small cabin on the property where he could live out his days in peace. Thomas and Sarah grew up calling him Uncle Samuel, learning ranch work from his patient instruction. Lucas continued to preach, though as the years passed and Douglas grew, they eventually hired a younger minister to assist him. Lucas found he preferred pastoral work to sermons anyway, visiting the sick and counseling the troubled and officiating at weddings and baptisms. He and Magdalena grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like good wine. They had their disagreements and their difficult times, as all couples do. There were droughts that tested the ranch, illnesses that frightened them, moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But they faced it all together, partners in every sense. They learned each other's moods and habits, learned how to fight fair and make up thoroughly, learned that love was not just passion but also patience, not just desire but also devotion. On their 20th anniversary, they sat on the porch of the house they had expanded and improved over the years, watching Thomas and Sarah play with their own children. Thomas had married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they had 3 children. Sarah had married a teacher who had come to Douglas to start a school, and they had 2 children with another on the way. "Did you ever imagine this?" Magdalena asked, her hand in Lucas's. "When you rode into Douglas that first time, did you imagine you would still be here 20 years later?" "No," Lucas admitted. "I imagined leaving on Monday like I always did, riding to the next settlement, the next temporary home." "What changed your mind?" Really, Lucas thought about it, about all the reasons he could give. The injustice of Kincaid's behavior, the obligation to help someone in need, the pull of settling down. All true, but none of them the whole truth. "You," he said finally, "you asked me a question I could not leave unanswered, not the question about Kincaid, though that was part of it, the deeper question. The one you asked just by being yourself, by showing me what it meant to be brave and faithful and committed to something larger than yourself. You made me want to be better, to do better. You made me want to stay." Magdalena leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am glad you did. I cannot imagine my life without you, Lucas. You gave me back my faith when I was losing it. Not faith in God necessarily, though that too, but faith in people, in love, in the possibility of second chances." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family, watching the sun set over the land they had fought for and built together. Lucas thought about the young preacher who had ridden into Douglas all those years ago, restless and searching and afraid of attachment. He hardly recognized that man anymore. He had been running from grief, he realized now, running from the pain of losing Sarah and the fear of losing anyone else he loved. But running had not protected him. It had just made him lonely. Stopping, staying, loving Magdalena and building a life with her that had healed him in ways he had not known he needed healing. It had not erased the grief or eliminated the fear. But it had given him something stronger than both. The courage to love anyway, to choose connection over safety, to bet everything on the possibility of happiness even knowing it could end. "I love you," he said to Magdalena. "I have loved you since the day you asked me to stay. I will love you until the day I die and beyond that if God grants such things." "I love you too," she replied. "My horseback preacher who finally learned to stop riding." Thomas called to them from the yard, asking Lucas to settle a dispute about who could rope a fence post faster. Sarah wanted her mother's advice about her youngest child, who was teething and cranky. The grandchildren demanded stories and attention. Lucas and Magdalena stood together and went to join their family. The evening was warm, the sky vast and starlit, and Lucas felt a profound gratitude for every choice that had led him here. For the courage to stay when staying was hard. For the wisdom to recognize love when it offered itself. For the grace to accept that happiness, however fragile, was worth the risk of loss. They lived many more years in Douglas, watching their children raise their own families, watching the town grow from a rough cattle settlement into a proper community. The church expanded, and a school was built, and the railroad came through, bringing new people and new opportunities. Lucas preached until he was 70, when his voice finally gave out and his legs could no longer manage the walk to church. He retired happily, content to spend his remaining years on the ranch, playing with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, working the land when his body allowed, resting when it did not. Magdalena remained strong and vital into her 70s, still managing the ranch with the help of Thomas and a handful of hired hands. She and Lucas celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by dozens of descendants, the house overflowing with love and laughter. Lucas died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, with Magdalena beside him as she had been for more than half his life. His funeral was held in the Douglas Church, now much larger than the modest structure he had first entered all those years ago. People came from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had touched so many lives with his quiet faithfulness and steadfast love. Magdalena lived another 3 years, dying at 77 with her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were about Lucas, about how she would see him soon, about how grateful she was for every day they had shared. They were buried together in the Douglas Cemetery, beneath a simple stone that bore both their names and a single line. They chose love and never regretted it. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through Thomas's line, a living testament to what Magdalena and Lucas had built together. Their great-great-grandchildren still work that land, still tell stories about the widow who fought to keep her property, and the preacher who stopped riding long enough to fall in love. It is a good legacy, built not on grand gestures or dramatic moments, though there were some of those, but on the daily choice to stay, to work, to love, to build something lasting in a hard and unforgiving land. The kind of legacy that matters, the kind of love that endures. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, people swear they can hear laughter from the old ranch house, the sound of a man and woman who found each other against all odds and held on tight, well, who is to say they are wrong? Love like that does not die. It just changes form, becomes part of the land and the air, and the stories people tell their children about what it means to be brave, to be faithful, to choose happiness, even when the world offers every reason to choose otherwise. Lucas Parker rode into Douglas, Arizona in August of 1884, planning to stay 2 days and leave on the 3rd. He ended up staying the rest of his life, and he never once regretted it. Because Magdalena Ortiz asked him a question, and in answering it, he found everything he had been searching for without knowing what he was looking for. He found home. He found purpose. He found love. And in the end, that was more than enough. That was everything. The horseback preacher never stayed past Sunday, until a cowboy widow asked him a question he could not leave unanswered. And in staying, in choosing her and the life they could build together, he discovered that the greatest adventure is not in constant motion, but in putting down roots, not in avoiding attachment, but in embracing it fully, not in protecting your heart, but in giving it away to someone who will treasure it as the gift it is. That is the story of Lucas Parker and Magdalena Ortiz. That is the story of how love can transform a life, how courage can look like staying when every instinct says to run, how the best things we ever do are often the things we never planned. It is a story worth remembering, worth passing down, worth holding close on nights when the world seems dark and the future uncertain. Because it reminds us that love is always possible, that second chances exist, that it is never too late to stop running and start living. And that sometimes the best thing we can do is simply stay. Stay and see what happens. Stay and build something real. Stay and love someone with everything we have, trusting that it will be enough, that we will be enough, that the life we create together will be worth every risk and every fear. Lucas and Magdalena proved it. They lived it, and their story echoes still, a testament to the enduring power of love and faith and the courage to choose connection over safety, community over isolation, staying over leaving. The horseback preacher finally stopped riding. And in stopping, he found everything worth living for. That is how their story ends. Or rather, that is how it continues, passed down through generations, a legacy of love that refuses to be forgotten. Because some stories are too important to lose, too powerful to fade, too true to ever really end. This is one of those stories. This is the story of Lucas and Magdalena, of staying and loving and building a life that mattered. This is the story of how a question asked in faith can change everything, how a choice made in courage can ripple forward through time, touching lives not yet born, inspiring hearts not yet opened. This is their story, and it is beautiful, and it is true, and it is enough.